What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. Patch 13.5 is coming out. For those who didn't get the memo, I am a game designer on the Summoners Rift team, so I had more than one hand. I had a few hands into this patch. Technically a couple. I have two hands. A few means more than two, typically. So, great intro. We're keeping it. Anyway, 13.5 is here, and let's talk about what's in the patch, what's going on, and yeah, maybe a little bit of what isn't going on. We'll see. Either way, we are certainly well into Spring Split. MSI is coming up relatively soon. We have not started really planning around MSI balance just yet. However, we are certainly still doing generic respond to pro play, respond to solo queue kind of stuff. So we have nerfs to the newly reworked Aurelion Sol, nerfs to Caitlyn, who has an incredibly high ban rate everywhere, as well as is the #1 AD carry in pro play. So indeed, nerfed everywhere, though skewed toward pro. Don't have to nerf because of ban rate, but certainly it is reasonable to nerf her in more than just pro. Gangplank, mostly an elite problem. Rammus, mostly a low elo problem. Twitch, mostly a high elo problem. Xayah, mostly a high elo problem. And Yorick, strong pretty much everywhere, but also mostly a low elo problem. I actually made sure that I tagged the champions that I shipped nerfs to, which was Caitlyn, Gangplank, Twitch, and Xayah. I made sure that I tagged them for the skill brackets where they actually were what I believe to be problematic, so I think accurate there. We also buffed Aatrox, who's not doing very well after his most recent set of nerfs, buffing Fizz, who isn't doing very well. Jinx, I know I've heard some complaints about, but there is the concept of some champions are simple to play, or generically end up being high mastery. Katarina is actually an example of this one, where I think Katarina is actually the highest mastered champion in League of Legends, and actually deserves to rest at a high win rate, because people are actually good at Katarina when you see them. Anyway, I think Jinx is sort of in this boat. People actually are Jinx aficionados in general, so people will see 50% win rate and be like, why did they buff Jinx? But it's like actually reasonable. For what it's worth, Gangplank is actually the opposite boat, where he actually loses win rate because of his mastery skew. People who are bad at Gangplank play a lot of Gangplank. Kennen, I know we missed him in 13.4. We were trying something else out. We didn't pan out, so shipped different nerfs, or well, chose different buffs and shipped them here in this patch. LeBlanc getting a normal elo, low elo skewed buff. Qiyana getting a buff. I forget the exact context here. Rumble getting a buff that is hopefully skewed towards top lane. Samira just getting compensation buffs because the nerfs I submitted for 13.4 ended up being a little bit too much, and so just simply walking that back a little bit seems reasonable. Tryndamere is very, very low win rate, so here have some pretty simple buffs, no problem there. Ashe is getting changed because she is the premier pro play champion. She is really skewed support right now. Her pick rate has kept climbing in support. Her ban rate has kept climbing because of support. Ultimately needs support nerfs, but AD carry Ashe is inoffensive, so trying to compensation buff that. Azir is basically my second patch in a row project onto Azir, where I am trying to unpro skew him. For what it's worth, in 13.4, his pro presence went from about 50% to about 10%, and he gained 1.5% win rate. That is really impressive. Some of this can just be pros are fickle, and he would come back at some point in time otherwise. And it's not just Aurelion Sol and Annie getting more popular. Several champions who were already in meta before are falling in above him, and he's like dropping below champs that he was having higher presence than before. So through that measure, it seems like pros are getting off of Azir. And even if these changes don't quite land perfectly, I'm happy to follow up and give him more win rate, but it seems like my tactics so far have been good at giving him win rate while lowering pro prio, and if I can get to a point where we can have a reasonable win rate and a reasonable pro presence, then y'all are welcome for a buffed champion. We'll see if Azir lands well in this patch for solo queue, but you know, again, we can always follow up on that as time goes on. Pantheon getting some augments to try to balance his role selection up towards top and away from mid. This is going to buff jungle a little bit. This might buff support a little bit here as well. I mean, ultimately, the champion is probably getting strictly buffed, but the goal is to try to skew Pantheon toward top lane. Yuumi is getting her big Midscope update. The hope is that she can still remain this easy to play, really good for first-time players champion, while her outputs aren't so offensive that she's not a huge frustration. I think it's actually possible on the champion. I know some people are just like, they just won't accept that Yuumi can be a viable champion, but honestly, y'all can deal with it. I think Yuumi is actually good for League of Legends overall as a game, and then Zed getting some adjustments as well. I think trying to I think it's just sort of, I wasn't super into the context of this one, so I couldn't tell you exactly, but it seems to be just kind of adding some more fun back to the champion, keeping the win rate relatively fair. I think some of this also is that WMAX has overtaken EMAX, and they're shifting that back so that EMAX second can be correct. Okay, so let's actually go into the patch in earnest one by one and what's going on here in this patch. So Yuumi's Midscope is coming. Substantial base health growth down. I actually love this a lot. I think this is one thing I actually noticed when playing against Yuumi, both the live version and I think pre these changes, the in dev version, which is that honestly, if Yuumi does get popped off, she should probably just die. And to be fair, 84 health growth is very, very low, and her overall armor MR and those growth stats are also very, very low. But also, she should kind of just die, and now that she has much less health growth, that'll be a little bit better there as well. Some level 1 mana constraints, not a big deal there, although I believe some of her mana regen stuff is gone, so we'll talk about that when it goes on. So a lot of these abilities are entirely rebuilt, redone. They're quite different. So let's talk about some really cool stuff that might be obvious and might be subtle, and walk through this. So okay, great. When Yuumi spells or attacks affect champion, she heals herself and then charges a heal for her allies. If she hops on, she'll give them a heal. So basically, instead of old bop and block, where it was about, hey, you should go disattach, go attack, go get your mana pool, go get your shield, you can get all this by just landing your Q. So the skill test of hop off and be an auto attacker then hop back on is gone. This is a huge thing to reduce her elite skew, her pro skew. I think this is directionally very good for the champion. This was one of the big things that I nerfed when I was told get Yuumi out of pro play entirely and bricked her win rate to 40%, was ruining her attack range, ruining her auto attack damage, and nerfing quite a lot of her shield. Now just the auto attack incentive is entirely gone. I think that is a really good thing. I think that's a really smart choice by the designer. Well done to Truxie on this one. And so, yep, basically you could just stay attached and get full credit, and that's the point, that you're turns out pros are really good at playing around the weakness of XD don't catch me, because you can react to Leona E, you can react to Thresh Q, you can react to Blitzcrank Hook in most contexts, and the whole like there's counterplay, you unattach, like isn't real about this champion when you're highly skilled. So getting rid of the highly skilled vector I think is pretty cool. Anyway, she has an extra mechanic called Making Friends, or Best Friend or Feline Friendship or something like that, where people you're attached to, you end up building affinity with that champion. So no longer is it, oh, Yuumi's a garbage laner, I have to suffer through playing Yuumi on my team, I'm going to play, I don't know, Ezreal, so we can just like let Yuumi scale, and then she's going to go buff Viego or Hecarim, and I'm just Ezreal who didn't get a real laning teammate. That it's like, no, a lot of Yuumi's power is going to be attached to, no, it's on your lane mate. And maybe your lane mate is Hecarim, maybe your lane mate is Viego or something, and you're going to play Viego Yuumi down in the bottom lane. But it's saying, look, you're not here to just ditch and then be a fighter support. You're here to be with your teammate. And I think, again, conceptually, like, you talk about the target audience for this champion, they're not the ones who are trying to hop out and be all like micromanagement with auto attacks and dodging skill shots. It's not about, I laid with my friend and now I'm going to go and, off and go buff someone else. It's like none of these changes penalize the first 5 games of League of Legends Yuumi players. It's like, yeah, I already played this way. Like, directionally, awesome design so far. I am behind this entirely. So the cooldown on the heal goes down over time, but yeah, you can heal about once per wave. The heal amount scales up pretty aggressively as well. I think it's 25 plus 5 per level, I think it is, with a moderate AP ratio. This isn't it's a decent AP ratio for the heal amount, but just sort of nice little stuff. Basically, there's a benefit on the tail end of landing a prowling projectile. I have tested this champion in dev as well. There are times where I will hop off an auto attack because it's something I can do. Like, this champion does have an auto attack. There is a reason to do this. You can hop off, get the auto attack on, go hop back on. Like, there is some of that, but it is so diminished compared to the live version of Yuumi. And then, hey, you get some attack range during it, because again, yep, maybe you want to do this. Maybe you want to get your auto attack off. So here you go, 50 attack range while it's there. Okay, great. I think this is a really, really well designed passive. Prowling Projectile has some really cool stuff here as well. So it's very, very similar. It slows the first person hit. If cast while attached, you can control it. What's cool, though, is this part here. So this removes a really, really big coordination test, which and reduces the requirement of your teammate to super know how your champion works. Again, Yuumi is a new player champion, functionally, right? That's my understanding of the presence of the champion. And by the way, like, her win rate is like incredibly elite skewed, because it turns out her outputs really, really required her teammates to know how their champion worked. So having played around this ability a lot in dev for the last several months, the way this works is you get the target for a while, and then pretty quickly it just fires out, which means you don't need your teammate to like walk forward and keep you in Q range so that you can land your Q. You are much, much less penalized by your teammate not knowing how your ability works as they walk backwards as you try to poke the Xerath or the Soraka or whatever. It's like, it's okay, I can still do this, and then psh, out it goes. Seriously, the feels on this are so much better when your AD carry doesn't understand your champion. Like, if you're a Yuumi player and you're watching this, dog, this feels really good. This is such a huge feel increase. You don't have to be attached. Well, you're attached, but like if they pull back and your radius keeps moving and your circle keeps moving, you will get this shot out. And trust me, this is such a feels win. This feels a lot better to play as the Yuumi. It also gives her less time to keep turning. So you get like, I think it's like 1 second of like 1.5 or 2 seconds. So it's like if you dodged it, it fires off behind you and you're good. So like it feels better to play against as well, where as long as you dodge behind a minion, it's too late, she can't recurve it anymore, you're gonna be fine. So like both ends I think get a lot better gameplay here. Again, like for 2 skills in a row, absolutely awesome job by the designer. Truxie I think has been, I think he's done a really good job with this so far. So the ability slow will let's see. So, your best friend bonus is that if you're attached to your best friend while doing it, the slow will always count as empowered. And if you land it on an enemy champion, you grant some on-hit damage for 5 seconds. So this makes it a little bit marksman bound because you get this benefit. If your best friend is melee, right? If you laned with Neela or Hecarim or whatever, well, guess what? Your point blank Q will land as a slow, and it's going to be fine. Also, yeah, the damage of this is increased, basically just scaling with crit chance entirely. I don't think there's an Infinity Edge special flag here. It's not a big deal. I don't think it's worth really compensating for, but that is what it is. 0.25 seconds per rank up. I don't know what the old cooldown is. Doesn't really matter. This has felt pretty reasonable as an ability. Mana cost does go up slightly with rank. Again, not a huge problem here. Nothing too special. Damage, pretty reasonable. Empowered damage is up. Empowered slow. Cool. I don't know, nothing much to talk about here, right? Obviously, this is like quite a bit of damage, about 50% more. Not much to say. Missile width is a bit higher, or sorry, a bit lower. I think this ends up, this I believe ties Ezreal Q. It was specifically called out that this is changing the projectile width so that it matches Ezreal Q, which seems pretty reasonable. Okay, great. Hey, now it has a reveal on them. That's kind of cool. It's not a stealth reveal. It's just it's like a Kog'Maw R where if they're in brush, you get to see them, things like that. So cool. I don't know exactly what the numbers are compared to before, but this ability has felt pretty good in playtesting. W no longer gives adaptive force and whatnot, no longer counts as an airy modifier as well. So again, lowering a little bit of skill cap here, but functionally Yuumi gets heal and shield power while attached, and she gives her teammate some on-hit healing. So she has on-hit damage if she lands Q, and she has on-hit healing while attached with W. This does make her a pretty good sustained champion, though keep in mind old Yuumi could unattach, auto-attack, get a permanent shield and put it on her teammate, and her E would be a heal. Now the heal is in the on-hit damage, and hey, 3 health on hit, that is what Cull does. Of course, if you go Spell Thief, she has some ability power. At 100 AP, this is +4. But yeah, the rank up is not absurd. There's not a ton of power here, but hey, a flat 10% heal and shield power while on her teammate. It's a pretty simple ability. That's fine. I'm actually kind of glad this doesn't have too much mind share. I think 11 on hit damage is certainly a much less offensive passive output than like 20% more adaptive force, which is like a very absurd amount of power. So I'm glad the power is being siphoned off of a pretty purely passive W effect. And especially that if you're not attached to your best friend, you're just attached. There is no W text if you're not attached to your best friend. So again, I think actually a pretty positive thing. Another, I think, good design. So next up is Zoomies. It now shields instead of heals. The cooldown is somewhat different. The mana cost is somewhat different. The shield strength is somewhat different. I, again, don't remember the entirely old numbers. It doesn't really matter here either. I know I could have written them down. Again, I don't actually care, though. It's a fully new champion. Comparing apples to oranges is not terribly useful. So whatever. While the shield persists, there is a movement speed boost, which is pretty much how the old E works. There's an attack speed bonus. That's kind of how the old E works there as well. And hey, by the way, she's going to give mana to her teammate, but not to herself. That is a new effect. So she's going to heal their mana pool and shield them. We'll give them movement attack speed. Now, worth noting that all this stuff does not care about best friend. And yeah, no best friend bonus on the E. If you want to go run out and save somebody, you're saving them is pretty much full power, aside from a little bit of heal and shield power here, which is cool. It gives you some target swapping where you should go in and save a frontliner, go and do that. I think this is actually really pretty intelligent. Cool. Not much to say about this one. I think it is good that they're, she has a reason to at least enchant her more than just an AD carry in the backline, or whoever she was the lane mate with, Karthus, whatever, but okay, fair enough. And then the R, I will say this took me a while to get used to, that the ability is quite different, because I'm so used to, on the receiving end of Yuumi, I've got to dodge away from this because I'm going to get rooted and I'm probably just going to die when that happens. This is a very different ability now. That's really the entire thing. For 3.5 seconds, you will fire 5 magical waves that affect enemies and allies. So kind of like Seraphine R, casting from your AD carry through your team actually is useful. You'll actually affect your teammates, and so that's okay. And because it's not hard CC, you're not like, well, let's go in with Viego and root their AD carry in place so that they can't dodge Viego's stun, and then they'll die, right? So anyway, if cast while attached, Yuumi can steer the waves to follow her mouse. This actually felt pretty good. I got this pretty much intuitively the first time I played the champion. It actually feels really good to, like, as your teammate moves around and is like, oh shoot, I can, like, veer this over here and still catch somebody. It actually feels really good to do. Again, experientially, Yuumi Q feels better. Yuumi R feels better. These both feel like better abilities to use. Yuumi has literally, like, she has felt more fun to me than live Yuumi, because I get a little bit more to do, and I'm a little bit less reliant on my teammate knowing what I do, which, I mean, is pretty good for a champion that, like, rides along, for the play. So actually pretty positive here. Anyway, for allied champions, she heals them. The heal is increased to more than double on her best friend. Excess healing is turned into a shield. Enemies, they deal damage and apply a stacking spell, but they do not root in the end. So cooldown is up by 10 seconds. Damage per wave is up a decent amount, 15 to 25. AP ratio is still quite low, which is, I think, is reasonable. Keep in mind that she would get a bunch of free AP in the old version, so this kind of just is a make good on the fact that, hey, she has less AP as a champion because of her W. And so the base damage is a little bit higher, which makes it a little bit similar. Heal per wave looks pretty aggressive. The heal doubling is actually a pretty aggressive scaling there, so that's actually quite a lot of healing. Keep in mind it's 5 waves, so 325 to her entire team. If she gets to 16, keep in mind, while attached to a best friend, she has up to 20% more heal and shield power, which is another 20% amp on the heal. This is a very, very big deal. Up to a 50% slow on the waves. This definitely can be pretty meaningful. And then, by the way, they also grant her best friend a bunch of armor and magic resist over the course of the spell. So you can be attached to someone else and ult and hit your teammate and give them a bunch of durability. But this ability really does feel quite good. This has felt very good to use, and it's obviously a big team fight win. So yes, Yuumi is getting a ton of power back. A lot of the really elite optimizations are gone. I think this is a huge, like, design win from P to R. Passive I realize those letters are far away on the keyboard, though very close together in the alphabet. I mean this as a compliment. I think this is a really sick set of designs, and I think this is really, really good for the champion. So looking forward to seeing Yuumi in the new patch, and I really do believe that. Okay, next up is Aatrox, who is getting some pretty simple buffs. Not buffing his healing, I think wisely so. I want to point out, actually, the designer who did the Aatrox changes is the one who also did the Doran Shield nerf for previous patch, and is doing Grasp and Triumph in this patch. He did a big report on overall healing, comparing it across the last 5 years, and that healing is at an all-time high in League of Legends. Some of this, of course, can be things like Divine Sunderer, but he did it like per champion as well, and even champions who don't always go Divine Sunderer, healing is generally up a lot in League of Legends, so he's targeting a bunch of, like, where is systemic healing coming from, where is this coming from? And so, I'm not, like, hard perusing everything he's doing. It's not my job. I'm not here to oversee anybody. I'm an individual contributor, but I know that he was doing a pretty big dive onto healing overall in the game, and I trust that he found important and correct things to identify to lower. We'll talk about that later on when we do more of the healing changes, but not, in fact, buffing Aatrox's healing here on the champion. So Infernal Chains gets a slightly better rank up on the cooldown, gets a rank up on the slow here as well, and then ranks 2 and 3 of his R give a little bit more attack damage. So here are the changes here on W. I'm pretty sure you're still going to max W last. There is a chance you switched out for the E. I doubt that highly, but technically your cooldown is a little bit nicer in later ranks. The slow, more aggressive here as well, 25% slow to 35% slow, is actually pretty good for reliability. There is a chance we see something like 2 points W and then E max second, just because of, like, a slightly better cooldown bump. Maybe, like, 1 point of this slow at some point makes it really, really hard for enemies to get out of the square. I don't know, trapezoid, whatever. I'm not saying it's definitely true, but it's a possibility, though I doubt it. Aatrox bonus damage to the R. This is how much total AD he has. This column here is how much total AD he has during the R before compared to after. So yeah, it's not huge, but Aatrox, we're not, he's not trying to get 5% win rate. So yes, this is a pretty light touch. This is late game skewed. Aatrox has tended to be a low win rate pro play problem champion. So I actually applaud going for late game, fairly inoffensive, honestly, buffs overall. I think reasonable stuff. Next is Ashe. This is stuff that I'd implemented. If you want further context on the Ashe changes, I recorded a video last week about the hows and whys of the things that I shipped in this patch. You can find it on the YouTube channel. It should be the most recent one before this one. Not a big deal, but ultimately, first up are Ashe support nerfs. It's just simply 10 damage off of volley and 20 to 0 seconds nerf on the R cooldown. I was tempted to do W cooldown, but I think ultimately wasn't the right call. Again, context in a different video. But 10 damage on volley, 20 seconds on R cooldown, and in general, if it's supposed to be a support-focused nerf, volley is a larger portion of support Ashe's power budget. R is a larger portion of support Ashe's power budget. She is going to less frequently use Ranger's focus. She's going to also generally have more mana as a champion because her items give mana. Spectral Sickle and its upgrades give mana regen, whereas AD carries aren't going more mana on her anymore. So they're not getting that. Also, keep in mind that things like Imperial Mandate is relatively common in support Ashe. That also gives mana regen. And so AD carry Ashe, I have felt, in my experience playing her, actually has mana constraints. And considering that Q's requirement for casting is getting the focus to cast the spell, it being a lower mana cost is, mana cost is not meant to be the gate here. It shouldn't feel bad to cast a steroid. You have to work to get in the first place. Also, because you have to work to get the steroid in the first place, increasing the empower duration by 50%, I think is going to be a fairly big deal here as well. This makes it now longer than Kaisa and Xayah's buffs, still shorter than Tristana's, which is 7 seconds long. But because you have to work for the buff, I think it's reasonable to get rewarded with a longer duration buff than most other AD carries get. I think that's totally reasonable overall. And so here is the data table on Ashe volley damage. It's, of course, down in the early game, early bullying down pretty meaningfully. Late game, meaning not quite so much. This is just her base. It is not counting attack damage items. And then here is the R cooldown, 25% longer in early ranks. Even though support Ashe is often going to go things like Ultimate Hunter, you're still 25% longer of whatever the cooldown ends up being up until level 11, and then it's still about 15% longer. So this should do a bit to move the needle on support Ashe. I think this should be enough compensation buff for AD carry Ashe to feel good. We'll see what happens, but there's always the ability to follow up in a future patch if needed. Aurelion Sol is like a 10% presence pro play champion. His late game, of course, is very, very good. He is extremely, extremely low elo skewed. So in general, scaling stats tend to be a pretty good low elo skewed nerf. A small AP ratio nerf to Breath of Light here as well, which of course is going to be more late game. So we can talk about Aurelion Sol's health pool. Before and after, it's down 4%. You account for his armor, and his overall physical durability is down 0 to 8%, which is a pretty meaningful dip in his ability to get killed in the late game. I think overall, just for champion health as well, he does so much damage. If he's more killable, it seems like a pretty good direction to go with the champion as well, so that seems solid. Here is the Q damage expectation without any startup, which of course is pretty troll and not accurate, but if you somehow have 0 Stardust the entire game, it is a 2 to 7% damage nerf on how much damage this does. Again, a little bit fraudulent, but I'm not going to make up how much Stardust he has in an average game. That's just too much guessing, and it's, whatever. So it's not going to be this bad of a nerf, but he will certainly lose some win rate. This might kick him out of pro since he was already pretty low presence. We'll see what happens. Next, the really, really big sweeping set of changes to Azir. Again, if you want something like 2 to 3 hours of context, I have both an Azir standalone video and then a follow-up Azir video. The one I talked about when referencing Ashe is the same video here. I spent about another 50, 40 minutes, something like that, talking about why Azir's going to change he's getting. TLDR, though, what we're trying to do here is lower his pro presence and give him the room to buff him in solo queue. So even if these patch notes don't land correctly and he ends up losing win rate in solo queue, the fact that in 13.4 he gained 1.5% win rate and his pro presence went from 50 to 15%, there's a pretty good chance that this is going to be directionally accurate as well, and we can continue to give him 1.5-2% win rate, and while lowering pro presence by just going farther along these lines. I think it's going to be doable. We'll see if his win rate ends up in a good or bad spot next patch. We'll have to see what happens, what his elo skew is, all things like that. But base health is down, armor growth up, base mana down, mana growth up, attack damage growth up, level 1 attack speed is lower because his W is no longer giving him any attack speed. Anyway, level 1 attack speed is down. Late game attack speed relatively similar via higher attack speed ratio and higher attack speed growth. We'll talk about this more as time goes on. His passive is better. Duration cut in half, cooldown cut in half. Overall durability, TLDR, is about the same. There is a bug fix here to where when you Zhonya's, you don't lose the... you don't get the minus armor MR debuff on your Sun turret. That was a very simple change, but I got help and figured out how to fix that, so now that's in there. Overall damage on the passive is up about 40%. We'll talk about that a little bit later with numbers as well. Again, durability about the same, but duration and cooldown cut in half. Q a bit less damage till 200 ability power, plus 10 to 30 on the mana cost. W no longer gives you free attack speed. Instead, the soldier damage per attack is up by 50 at level 18, but the 3 soldier attack speed buff is gone. And this is just a very simple revert of one of the buffs from the previous patch. The base damage is still buffed, but the AP ratio is down, as casts of E is an elite skewed statistic. So buffing E or, unbuffing E is another elite skewed tactic. So let's talk about all these changes with Azir. Okay, well, his total health pool is definitely down. Now, keep in mind, at any given point, if you cast E for a shield, you're essentially giving yourself flat health, which softens this nerf somewhat, but it's still there. It's still true. Accounting for his armor, his durability against physical damage breaks even by level 12, which is about halfway through the game, though certainly I'm under no pretenses, this is definitely a nerf to the champion. His base mana, and especially if you account for his overall base mana regen, is down nominally in the early game. It breaks even level 17. This is obviously not a buff as well, but just a moderate tap down to his early mana pool. Again, an early game focused nerf to Azir, and early game tends to be an elite skewed thing. We'll talk about the other stuff later, but obviously his early durability, his early mana pool is down. Here is, again, the quick table on his turret's durability. It's really close to the same durability overall. Keep in mind that because the turret lives 30 seconds at a 60, it will decay at a faster rate. It will lose more health per second, so even though these numbers are green, functionally it is not a more durable structure at pretty much any point in time. It's roughly similar, though, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Turret damage per shot to minions is up 50 to 75%. But because the turret damage no longer has a 37% champion damage amp, but because the damage has switched from physical damage to magic damage, that Azir with no magic pen whatsoever is doing roughly, as the math shakes out, 25 to 60% more damage to enemy champions. Now, it's worth pointing out, though, the passive applies spell effects and cares about Azir's things like Sork Shoes and Void Staff and everything else. It's got a more aggressive ability power ratio as well, so even Death Cap matters here. So this might slightly undercount the actual buff to the Azir turret, but functionally, his passive is definitely a lot stronger, and it's up twice as often. That's going to carry some amount of win rate. Obviously, again, he's losing some mana pool, he's losing some durability. His overall Q damage is, again, down until you can reach 200 ability power. It's going to be around level 13. There's around 2 items. This is Luden's plus Shadow Flame, Luden's plus Nashor's Tooth. Around here, you get enough AP that you have buffed your Q damage back up, but again, an early game focused nerf. Overall Q cost is up. I went with a scaling cost because you max Q first, and typically, what I've seen is that as soon as he gets Lost Chapter or gets to his Mythic, his mana costs no longer matter, and he just spams Q on you, and Q is the single largest representation of things that elite Azirs do that regular players do not. He has something like 30%, I think, more Q casts in elite hands than average hands. This is something that just like players aren't doing, and so by making it more expensive, the fact that people don't do it as often isn't going to be as punishing for lower skilled Azirs. Again, trending toward pro play, right? Can raise the floor on this champion somewhat. Okay, here is the big thing on attacks per second with Azir. So here is what he was in the live game, accounting for pretty much basic runes, his W rank up, and all the other stuff. Here is him with his new attack speed ratio, his new runes, his new base stats, and obviously his attacks per second are lower, but not by an absurd amount. Even at level 7, it basically breaks even, but somewhat lower attack speed. Absolutely true. Has fewer attacks per second. This is now with Nashor's Tooth. If you were to teleport the item into his inventory at level 1, which obviously is a bit fraudulent, you can probably delete, these points pretty safely, and it's, we don't have to think about it too much. But you can see that Nashor's Azir is really, really similar in attacks per second because his attack speed ratio went up and the amount of free attack speed in his kit went down, which makes attack speed purchases better in functionally both cases. And this is a quick look at, hey, what was my attacks per second gain as a percentage in the old version and the new version? You can see it's about 4 percentage points, 5 percentage points more gain from Nashor's Tooth. So a bit better of an item overall. Okay, well, again, his soldier damage per hit went up. His overall attack speed went down. What's going on here? Well, here's Azir's base AD and then his auto attack DPS because of his attack speed changes. Of course, his base AD is higher. His overall DPS on auto attacks is a pretty minor one, of course. But again, worse in the early game, but after first recall, he functionally has more auto attack damage than before. And in a world where you're going for a Nashor's Tooth, his DPS, when people get out of range of his soldiers, is going to be up substantially by getting more attacks per second, more damage per auto attack, and if Nashor's Tooth is now a correct build on him, he's got a lot better of a fallback plan. I'm trying to put Nashor's Tooth back into an item he wants to buy. Okay. Here is the damage per hit on his W. This is not counting ability power. This is counting ability power. It is better from level 8 onwards. The damage per hit on his soldier is down until level 8, and the damage per hit on a soldier is irreparably always higher. This is now the DPS table of his W DPS. This is counting for ability power, but going for a Luden's Echo, Luden's Tempest Shadow Flame build. And you can see that the DPS is, again, lower until about first item, and then his DPS is just always higher, especially late game. You're going to see, 4, 7, 9, 11% more damage. Certainly, it's treading water in the mid game, then it really, really spikes late. These numbers maybe need to go higher if this ends up being enough for the champion overall, but again, early laning phase weaker, and then just in the green for the future. If you're going for Nashor's Tooth build, again, we can kind of delete this because you're not going to have Nashor's Tooth before level 7. Nashor's Tooth build spike obviously a lot sooner, and you can see the DPS comparison is quite a bit nicer. Doing some pretty thorough research into item builds, Nashor's Tooth has been about a 2% win rate drop compared to Shadow Flame. If the Nashor's Tooth build is, again, gaining 5% damage build over build, whereas regular builds are getting 1% damage build over build, then or patch over patch, then this could do enough to make Nashor's again, strong and viable option on the champion. So we'll see if that ends up being true. But certainly, if you are playing Nashor's Azir, which, by the way, lower skilled players were more likely to play Nashor's Azir than higher skilled players. Higher skilled players, I correctly identify that Nashor's is not a viable item on this champion. Lower skilled players don't do that yet. If I can get Nashor's to equal win rate with Shadow Flame, even if it's slightly higher, I think it's fine. This not only gives him, again, a fallback pattern, people are out of range of his soldiers, but also just, I think, fits the fantasy of what the champion does in the first place, and he'll feel fast again, right? He'll feel like he has all those attacks per second as before. So that is the DPS comparison. That is the big sum change to the champion. Losing early durability, losing early DPS, losing early mana pool, gaining a much stronger passive turret, and gaining mid to late game soldier DPS, and gaining especially mid to late game soldier DPS if you have a Nashor's Tooth. Now, I do not have any data tables here for what the 3 soldier passive loss is going to provide. This, of course, is some amount of win rate loss here as well. We'll see what happens, but I think this will be roughly win rate neutral for the champion. We'll see if there's going to be huge player base swings because a bunch of not skilled Azir players come in and tank the win rate because they're not good at Azir. That is a possibility. We'll see what happens, though. Obviously, this is a pretty big reshape to the champion, but I think realistically, we end up going a little bit conservative here. I want to do one more thing as a bookend to this section because I have been watching Azir win rate basically, or pick rate in pro basically every single day. The expectation was 13.4 was to try to tread water win rate wise and lower pro presence. It exceeded expectations by raising win rate and lowering pro presence, but keep in mind that we locked 13.5, these changes, before any pro play on 13.4 happened. So we had no way of knowing if his pro presence was going up or going down via the changes. And by the fact that the hope was, win rate neutral, pro presence down, and we got win rate positive, we assumed it was also going to be pro presence neutral to positive. And so we erred on the side of these being nerfs for Azir. Again, post-patch locked, I have looked basically every day at pro presence. I'm like, okay, finally the LPL is on this. Okay, finally non-challenger leagues are on this. Okay, finally the LCS is on this. Okay, what's going on? And it's like, as we've gotten more games and more games and more games, this is a 10% pro presence champion, 10-15% pro presence champion, which means that, okay, if we had magically known that, if I could have been like, I can see the future, his pro presence is 10%, we have budget, this probably could have been a more aggressively positive list overall. Again, we'll see what happens though. Like if this could still possibly be win rate positive because the passive is a whole lot better. We'll see what happens. But I am the more I think about this changes, the more I am pretty sure this champion is not in pro anymore, and we have a lot of room to buff the champion. If this guy is dog shit and he's 35% win rate, we can micropatch. I don't think it's possible. I don't think this change is very negative for most players in solo queue, but again, we'll see. I'm super excited to see what the win rate is day one on the new patch tomorrow morning. We'll see what happens, but again, let's move forward finally on to the next one. So Caitlyn is a pro-focused, but for everybody nerf here on the champion. I think to me 60 AD is the lower limit of what I am comfortable nerfing an AD carry to. Just overall, you know, last hit ability is a really big deal for these champions. They typically can't use their spells reliably to last hit. It is all on their auto attacks. They can pretty easily be put under turret through no fault of their own because the support matchups matter as well. I think I mean, here's the weird thing, because of course AD carries are getting poached as supports in pro play, so it's really awkward, but like I would kind of like to get AD carries at some point back to like 65 base AD to make it easier to last hit. Maybe it has to go into Doran's Blade or something, or Cole or something, but I think giving them a bit more self-reliance in lane is possibly a very good thing for the class. Regardless, it's not about this right now. But again, don't want to nerf below 60. So I stopped at 60 here, but going for early game focused nerfs. Early game tends to be pro play focused. Also, to be fair, going to 60 makes this a support Caitlyn small nerf as well. Base stats, of course, affect supports. But 1 armor and 2 base AD is meant to be about 1% win rate. It's why I like kind of split the difference here and did a little bit of each one. This puts her at, again, a relatively local minimum for attack damage, a relatively local minimum for base armor. She's not the lowest in either category at this point, but yeah, dropping down a little bit. Not a lot to look at here. Here's the physical durability of the armor change. It's 0.8 to 0.5% less durability. It's not a very big change. 3 to 2% less AD is something. It's not a ton, but it's there. So there you go. Fizz is getting some niceness changes. I'm actually a pretty big fan of mana cost changes to Fizz. If his mana costs are cheaper, he can go for non-mana cost options, right? He can hop out of going Leanders or Ludens and go into Rocket Pill, into Night Harvester, into things like that. Maybe even an AP Bruiser build through things like Riftmaker, I think, is a possibility. But ultimately, hey, getting a full refund on your W. Congratulations, you now match every other champion that has refunds on kill, basically. Simple 10 damage increase to the E, and a pretty nice 15 mana cost reduction on his E as well, I think is quite nice. Honestly, as an occasional Fizz aficionado, very happy to get the mana pool back on the champion. So here is the E damage before and after with approximation for ability power. Here is the E cost before and after with approximation for ability power. Well, not ability power, but just here's the mana cost before and after here as well. So yeah, pretty solid changes to Fizz. He's looking pretty solid. I think it'll be good. So we have Gangplank now as well. As I mentioned in the intro, Gangplank is a poster child for his win rate actually being depressed by unskilled Gangplank players playing Gangplank. You cannot simply look at win rate, you can't look at just simple pick rate and say, I know what kinds of players play this champion. That is a fraudulent statement. You cannot make that. You actually need to find mastery data. If you don't have mastery data, then you cannot make that statement. However, we have mastery data internally. And so I can say with confidence that Gangplank, his win rate, is depressed by bad Gangplank players. And his win rate is, by the way, above 50%. So Gangplank should just be nerfed. So Trial by Fire is losing 5 to 60 damage. This is true damage on the passive. And keep in mind that if you're a very good Gangplank player, you auto attack, then bust a barrel, then auto attack again, and refresh this passive damage burn. And you get this thing almost twice. There's a lot of power here. This definitely matters quite a bit in terms of your ability to trade back against him. You still want this to have enough power that he wants to use the passive. He's not just a barrel bot, but doing something here. And speaking of Powder Keg, now that he is very much going for high ability haste builds, the Keg recharge rate is nerfed from rank 2 onwards because he's already going to have really, really good barrel recharge rate in the first place. And I'm very happy that I thought of this and got it implemented, a little bit of help from one of the designers to know where to look at how to do it. But I basically copied a lot of his scripting from, I think I copied it, I forget. It doesn't matter. Either way, you can now see how many kegs he has over his health bar. It is in the mana, in his, he basically has ammo. Yeah, congratulations. He has ammo. I'm really, really glad to get this one in. I think it's a really cool change. And so players will have a much better time playing around when he has his downtimes. And yes, this means that he's kind of got toilet paper kind of trailing on his shoes, where now you know his resources. But to be fair, other champions, you can see how much mana they have. But you don't typically see other champions' cooldowns. And his recharge on kegs is kind of a cooldown, to be fair, but I think it's also pretty reasonable for this ability to showcase its resource because it doesn't cost mana. And so something there I think is reasonable. Overall for the health of the champion should help counterplay quite a bit. I think this is actually a really good change for the champion. We can look at the overall passive damages with a decent approximation of bonus attack damage and crit chance for how much damage the burn will actually deal. And it's down a solid 10% at pretty much all points in time. Keg recharge 6 to 30% slower by level 13. I think is pretty meaningful here as well. Pretty big Gangplank nerfs overall. I think a balanced Gangplank sits about 49% win rate. So if the nerfs come in, he's at 49. That is pretty much by design. That is the target. That is basically, if he's at 49, that is taking the win rate loss from low mastery and saying he's a 50% champion. PLDR. And basically any champion where like if you have a mastery corrected win rate of 50%, that means these champions all have above 50 on masters, like people who are good at the champion, and below 50 people who are bad at the champion. And having a win rate adjusted, or having a mastery adjusted win rate of 50% is pretty reasonable as like a baseline for a lot of champions. Some maybe should still move beyond that point, but yeah, if he doesn't have any behavioral changes and he's at 49, he's at a mastery adjusted 50 basically. Okay, move on to the next one. Jinx, speaking of mastery adjusted champions, she's actually surprisingly a very high depth champion as well. People who like Jinx really like Jinx. They are kind of Jinx mains. She is definitely up there, the champion. So some moderate attack speed growth. This ends up being, I think it's like 3%. I think it's 6% attack speed at level 18, 10 mana cost of W, 10% increase in the slow, and then just the R damage cap is back to matching Smite. I believe this cap is before armor and MR, so it won't quite deal as much damage as Smite, but yep, the Death Rocket now matches Smite's breakpoints here. So here is her attacks per second in Minigun without itemization. Here are her attacks per second in Rocket form without any itemization. So a pretty small tap to Minigun, a little bit of a larger one to Rocket form. This will make Rocket form feel substantially better, I believe. Her overall cost, again, down by 10, pretty meaningful. And her slow up by 10, pretty meaningful here as well. So some solid stuff here. She certainly will gain some win rate. Not much to say here. She's going to get more powerful. It's definitely true. Next, we have Kennen. There was a look at his Q being a cooldown reset mechanic, kind of like we're going to see with LeBlanc Q in a little bit, but, you know, anti-Q, things like that. Didn't end up going with it, so instead, some somewhat simpler changes. His early game Shuriken spam, a little bit stronger. His late game Shuriken damage, pretty substantially stronger. W now has a for self range indicator. I think this is great. I think this is a really good change. Twitch E has it, for example. And yeah, I think just very smart. This is the same designer who did the healing identification stuff, the Aatrox buff, and I think this is I really like this change. I think anytime designers can come in and be like, hey, wait, I can make the playing as or playing against experience feel better, and it's not really raw power. Like I think it is a really important skill to find satisfaction without power, because it's very easy to say, oh, you just do more damage, that's going to be fun, but you're buying that with power budget. This is when I buffed AD carries in 13.1b. I was like, I know AD carries aren't underpowered, but they feel bad. They're just getting power here. And lo and behold, AD carry is a very overpowered role now, and it's gonna get nerfed, don't worry. But like, it's just a matter of time before this has to happen. And I think Perception is pretty aggressively now caught up with the power level, and we can pretty safely nerf AD carry back down. But the hope is that through the buffs and nerfs, the role still feels more fun than before, and through this musical chairs or Jenga tower or whatever you want to call it, power level goes back, but satisfaction is here. And so like this Kennen W is the power level is this, but the satisfaction, like the usability, the satisfaction is here, right? Those are really good changes. I'm a really big fan of those happening. Lightning Rush also getting a softened minion damage modifier. Max E lasts still, but of course has an AP ratio, everything else. So here is Kennen's Q cooldown before and after, buffed levels 1 through 8. Here is the damage before and after, and it's up pretty substantially, 20, and the AP ratio means level 9 onwards is a pretty substantial damage increase, and as the AP ratio goes up and up, and his ability power goes up and up, it gets better and better. So yeah, this is pretty substantial damage on the Q. We can look at his E minion damage. If you somehow max it second for some reason, here's your data table. It's a solid 60 increased damage at level 13. That is very unrealistic. It's gonna be more like this one where it's like 30 something, 35 increased damage, but still, yeah, he does 30% more damage to minions now because that's what this number means. This will probably help him hit some pretty big breakpoints in terms of wave clear. He almost certainly should still max W second. To be clear, you should max W second almost certainly. But he's now got better side laning wave clear, and he's got better Q poke and Q all-in damage. So fun stuff for Kennen, definitely some power for him. LeBlanc is getting a hopefully normal skewed buff where, hey, the Q is better at last hitting minions. It deals bonus damage. And by the way, It will restore the mana cost and some of the cooldown back. So if you simply last hit with the Q by like the minion gets low and you press Q like your Annie, congratulations, it costs 0 mana. It's on a relatively short cooldown of about 4 seconds, but then it's going to come back and it'll help you. And this will help LeBlancs as they get towards level 7, 8, 9, things like that. They'll have a reliable last hitting tool. Also, because either part of it will reset the mana cost and the cooldown. And I believe Sigil of Malice deals... I don't know if it deals bonus damage in just the first half or on both halves. I'm actually not certain of this one. But even still, you can, like, at level 9, right, Q the Kennen minion and then W it and get your Q back. So last hit assistance to LeBlanc is in. RQ will mimic the behavior on minions as well. So if you really want to QR a Kennen minion to last hit it, your R is going to get a 30% cooldown refund. Not a big deal, but is there. So here is the minion damage on either half before and after. This is the ability you max seconds. So, you know, this is when one rank comes in, and then here's when it's maxed out. And you can see, yeah, a pretty substantial damage increase to the ability where, yeah, you have a, you know, 100, like, you know, level 5, right? You have 132 damage ability that costs 0 mana to last hit with. Now, the cooldown, again, is still about 4 seconds. I think it's going to be like 3.5. Something around there. But I think this is a good change, right? This helps... like, not good LeBlanc players in last hitting. She will be easier to play, but LeBlanc has always been the problem of this champ, is been in pro play and 47% win rate in solo queue, and I'm a really big fan of, like, yeah, sometimes you have to add mechanics. And I think that's okay. I think this is a cool change. I think this is a nice thing for LeBlanc. She has had just her entire career has been being elite skewed, and softening that in some ways I think is a really good thing. So, more good designs by the designer who did the Yuumi Midscope. Pantheon is coming out. This actually is a project picked up by the game design lead of the entire gameplay initiative, which is like oversees the Summoners Rift team, the Champions team, the modes team, which is like Aram and stuff. So he's a little biased. He's a Pantheon Draven player. But anyway, he's the guy who authors quick gameplay thoughts a lot of the time. Riot Axes. I think this guy's super smart, by the way. I think this guy's a really, really good game designer. I'm actually very happy to be working under him. But anyway, looking to find mid lane focused nerfs to get him buffed into top viability. Jungle, I think, is a possible part here as well. But we'll start with the buffs. So Q cooldown is down 2 to 0 seconds. Mana cost is down by 5, and the wind-up time down by 0.05. Worth noting, though, that the way the Q is coded, he actually has a longer than normal cast animation for tap Q. Functionally, he doesn't really have a 0.25 second cast animation. It's more like 0.3 something. And so this going down to 0.2 actually makes it more like really 0.25. It's maybe a little janky. I don't know exactly the details. Again, not really much of a Pantheon player, but that actually makes it line up with other like normally sized skills. So this ends up actually just being like an appropriate actual time frame. Either way, mana cost down, cooldown down, and cast frame down means that it is a more spammable, like melee range hit you ability. Like if you're going to charge Q, this wind up time doesn't matter. And if you're going to charge Q, this cooldown is still pretty long, and it's still only about twice per wave. But if you're going to tap Q and fight a Renekton or a Set or whatever, well, guess what? You can do a lot more tap Qs. This will do a very large amount for its early laning. This is about a 2% overall permanent attack speed increase. I think it's like 2.2%. That's a pretty meaningful increase as well. If this was a marksman, this buff would be around 1% win rate. Melee spellcastery champions are not marksmen. This will be less than 1% win rate for him, but certainly this is some amount of power, especially in the jungle, especially in lanes where he's going to auto attack a lot, which is like, what does Fiora, Jackson, and Renekton do? They get in melee range to auto attack you. So Pantheon will as well. This is a top lane skewed and, to be fair, jungle skewed buff. Again, Q spam, top lane, and jungle skewed buff. Aegis Assault just simply getting its rank up worsened by 0 to 2 seconds, and his health regen is down by a bit as well. I think top lane matchups tend to be a bit more all-in-y, whereas I think his mid lane matchups tend to be a bit more poke-focused. Now, worth noting that on live, in both top and mid lane, people tend to max E second, but W max second has had a much higher win rate. I think this will probably tip people over the edge, and they will just max W second now, and they'll leave E at 1 point because they're only getting 1 second instead of 1.5 seconds on the cooldown per rank up, and we'll see a big shift here. That should be win rate positive to the champion, I believe. Regardless, let's talk about the numbers at hand and what's going on here. So here's Pantheon's health per minute before and after. Right, 20% down to the early game. His early laning phase definitely has a lot to sustain. As I said, 2.2% more attacks per second overall, just counting his base attack speed growth. He goes up to about 1 attack per second. Okay, great. Nothing too special here, but is getting a bit stronger here. Early game Q trade back is getting better. E cooldown, of course, if you max second, is getting worse. So Pantheon, I want to point out, by the way, is no longer just an early game monster. Like, as a champion, his power curve is actually relatively flat. He has a totally solid late game because he has a lot of damage. He has a lot of map mobility because of the armor pen passive on his ultimate. Like, he has good damage throughput as a champion. And so, hey, he's got an early game focus buff that completely falls off. He's got a late game nerf here. He's got an early game nerf that totally falls off, and a throughout the game change. Like, this isn't really shifting his power curve all that much, right? Early game down, early game better. You could argue this may be late game better and late game worse. Either way, the reshape towards making him a better top laner. We'll see how it lands, but I think there's actually some pretty cool changes. Qiyana is getting buffed. She's not doing very well overall, giving her 5 damage on the rank up of Q, no change to the AD ratio, and 1 second off the cooldown of E. Here is the damage table, and here is the cooldown table. Nothing much to talk about here. Certainly just going to be doing a bit more damage, doing a bit more other stuff. I think buffing the Q is pretty solid. Using the passive well, using the W well, is a big skill test for Qiyana. Those things are not getting buffed. This is going to be a slightly more normal skewed buff as a result. We'll see how it does, but I think some solid changes here to Qiyana. Next is Rammus, who is getting nerfed because he is taking over low elo solo queue a bit too much. Now, I think Rammus is the champion who correctly should also live above 50% win rate. He is almost always used as a raw counter pick. In general, I'm of the belief that really, really common champions that are not common because they're high mastery and popular by mains, but because they're just sort of meta champions that people just picked up and played, those champs should tend to probably be slightly below 50% win rate because people on average should tend to pick counters. And so anytime we're in like an AD heavy jungle meta, Rammus should do well because you pick him into AD junglers. And if you only see AP junglers, people shouldn't pick Rammus as much. And this tends to happen if you look at champions like Malphite and Rammus, you look at their matchup tables. They have very different common matchups to generic junglers like Elise or Echo or Graves or Lee Sin, or generic top laners like Jax and Fiora and stuff like that, where they're really popular, but Rammus and Malphite come out when they're against specific compositions. Malphite's most common matchup by far is like Jace and then Jax, and it's like, oh yeah, those are relatively common champions, but it's like, no, he's used as a counter pick into lanes he's good into. Rammus is a pretty similar boat here as well. So again, I think this is a champion who probably should rest above 50%, and I think he still will, but he's losing quite a bit of attack damage growth, which doesn't matter too much because he gets a bunch of free attack damage via his passive. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And of course, his Powerball going down 0 to 20 damage is to find another nerf that does something to the champion. So here is his on-hit damage limit. He buys 0 armor items and never activates W. Here is his on-hit damage per attack. Still relatively high, keeping in mind that he gets a free 10 on-hit damage. So his level 1 AD is, again, actually 69. Nice. And it scales up to 125, which is pretty solid there as well. Of course, again, you hit Ball Curl, ton more armor there. You buy a Thornmail, you buy a Sunfire Cape, you buy Jack Show. All those things are going to up his armor as well and further increase auto attack damage. So he's not hurting for auto attack damage, but he's going to be down somewhat. Rammus is an auto attacker somewhat. His Q damage, of course, again, down 0 to 20. He doesn't really buy ability power, so yep, down some damage on that early crash. Here we have Rumble. Rumble is someone that I suggest that we go after because he is really mid lane skewed in win rate, and he has just continually over years lost top lane play rate as people have abandoned him. Like his win rate skew is still really, really severe in top versus mid, and he's still, in the hands of most players, a more popular top laner than mid laner. Like, I think we've been failing Rumble for a while. I wish we picked him up a little bit sooner, but I'm glad we're getting to him now and trying to give him buffs that are skewed toward top lane. Now, he is getting a substantial increase in Magic Resist Shred on the ability that he maxes second. So up until level 7, this is a 10% shred, becomes a 12% shred. The shred stacks additively. This is actually coded as there is a variable for what is the 1 harpoon shred and a variable for what is the 2 harpoon shred. They are coded and identified completely separately, and that is how it works. That is how this champion actually functions. It stacks additively. The numbers are defined on their own in specific ways, and the second harpoon is coded as twice the amount, but again can be done in a bespoke level. So let's talk about how much this really, really matters for Rumble, because obviously this can be a pretty big buff. Let's talk about it. Okay, so here is Rumble on low heat hitting like Ashe with no MR. Right, 3153 MR is like basic range champion with base MR per level, no stat shards, no wits end, no hex drinker, no merc treads. So they would normally have 3153 MR, and if he hits in E, he shreds 10% of their MR, and so they instead have 28 to 48 MR. Now they're going to have 27 to 42, which is a damage amp of 0.5 to 3.7%. So if you aren't overheating, or landing multiple harpoons against a Squish champion who's not buying MR, you are doing 1 to 4% more damage. I guess with that harpoon, I'm pretty sure it shreds before dealing damage, and then for any further damage. So E has up to a 4% damage amp now attached to it, which is not bad. But let's keep going. If you're against a tanky target who is buying MR against you, they're running a stat shard. They have 32 base MR. You're looking at Darius with a stat shard. He buys Merc Treads. He buys Wit's End. He buys a Maw. He goes up to 210 magic resist. Well, your 10% shred is up to a 20% shred, and this is now a further 7.5% damage amp instead of being a further 3.5% damage amp as you go on, around here or something, right? So, okay, it is certainly skewed towards high MR targets. Not a surprise, but you look at, the types of champions Rumble fights in top lane, people who are more willing to buy Merc Treads, who are more willing to buy Whetstone, who are more willing to buy Hex Drinker, will buy those things first item against you. Okay, and again, keep in mind, this thing doesn't really kick in any meaningful way until around level 8 or so, when the MR shred really bumps, right? Like 1% more damage compared to pre-patch is not a very big deal. But again, this is outgoing damage against Squishy is 0.6% higher compared to pre-patch. And now this is outgoing damage 1% higher compared to pre-patch, eventually up to 8% more damage compared to pre-patch against a very, very high MR target, landing just one harpoon while not overheated. Then we go to the highest possibility, which is Danger Zone, and 2 hits. So the Squishy target would have 22 to 37 MR, now just simply sits at about 20 MR, which means, yes, if they don't buy any MR and you buy Sork Shoes, you are doing true damage from level 13 onwards to very Squishy targets. But to be fair, that is, not, I mean, it's still, certainly, it matters, right? To be clear, it certainly still matters. But, level 13, Danger Zone, land 2 harpoons, okay? The outgoing damage of your champion is up 11% patch over patch. If you land 2 Danger Zone harpoons, you're doing 11% more damage to the target you have double hit. Now, no one else is taking any bonus damage, but the target you are primary hitting is taking 11% more damage patch over patch. Now, the first harpoon, again, is giving you 3% more damage patch over patch. Well, a bit more because of Danger Zone, whatever. But the second harpoon is now giving you 11% more damage patch over patch. Now, the question is, are you saving your Q until after second harpoon? Are you saving R until after second harpoon? I don't know. This might be a big skill test. But now saving some damage for after second harpoon is going to be part of it. Now, guess what? Who's able to be hit by harpoons? The Azir, who's behind a minion wave? Or the Darius, who is trying to fight you on top of your face? Now, Darius is not this guy. What's again the tanky target? Well, level 13, we hit double harpoon, and there is now 28% more damage coming out of your kit compared to pre-patch. Double harpoon is now a 28% more damage amp compared to pre-patch. Now, this is before Sork Shoes. This will go up a little bit more if you have things like Sork Shoes. It will actually go down if you have Void Staff, because the value of Void Staff against a more shredded target is a bit lower. But Sork Shoes is going to be up, and Sork Shoes is really common, of course, on him. But yeah, against the really, really tanky targets in front of you, a double Danger Zone Harpoon corresponds to a 28% damage amp to your primary target during the debuff, which is, I believe, 3 seconds long. So enough time for your Q, enough time for most of your R. Enough time for potentially your passive. You can really time it, and you can overheat and go into actual overheat during this. So let's do this one other way, which is, once again, double hit Danger Zone. What was the damage amp that a double hit Danger Zone E provided you on live? And what is the damage amp that a double hit Danger Zone provides you post-patch? So it used to give you about up to 10% more damage against the Squishy. Now it gives you 23% more damage against the Squishy. Against a very tanky target, used to give you 22% more damage. Now it gives you a 56% more damage. You notice that these numbers line up exactly with this other data table, because that is how math works. So yes, double E is a 50% bonus damage amp. That is, of course, quite a lot. But those are the numbers. That's what's going on here, right? This is what this ability does. Keep in mind that, he doesn't have a W rank up, really. It doesn't give him any more damage. So this is now an ability that scales on its own, scaled by MR. He functionally gets per level scaling via the E being stronger and stronger and stronger. This is quite a buff, right? This is going to be a lot of power. It is skewed toward top lane. But keep in mind, you are not going to always land 2 Danger Zone Harpoons against an ideal target in the late game. That is not realistic. That is not going to be happening all the time. It will be happening sometime. It will happen sometimes. We'll see what this does. This certainly will be a buff for the champion. It can't not be a buff. We'll see what happens. And if he has to be nerfed, okay. we'll see what happens. Samira getting a walk back of the nerf from the previous patch. I didn't bother putting a data table down for this one because I think the numbers are really, really obvious. She gets twice as much bonus move speed at level 1. She gets a little bit more compared to previous. And by the way, 3.5% was the old flat amount on the champion. So it is still definitely less attack speed, or sorry, less move speed than 13.3 Samira into level 16, where it matches back up from before. Yeah. And then, of course, she's still keeping the lifesteal efficiency from the previous patch as well. So a simple walk back. Samira should be around 50% win rate and should be fine. And as I said in the previous patch, right, I think, like, in general, right, like, we have goals in mind when nerfing, and if we miss on the goals, we just buff them back or nerf them back or whatever the previous patch and line up. Like, there's basically two-ish skills here, right? There's identifying, hey, directionally, what are the nerfs that make League of Legends a more fun game? And then magnitude-wise, how do we hit win rate targets or ban rate targets or pro presence targets, right? And it's like, okay, I think, and this is with help from the other designers and other people on the team, that like hitting lifesteal efficiency and hitting early move speed on the passive are like directionally going to reduce frustration. The magnitude I guessed on and I got some feedback. And they're like, yeah, this seems about right, but the magnitude is wrong. So we just walked back the magnitude. We were still pretty confident about what we did, but how much we did it was incorrect. So we walked back the how much we did it. Seems pretty reasonable. Tryndamere is not doing very well overall in solo queue. When Trynd was a big pro meta champion, it was because he had a very abusive early game that couldn't be punished. So I don't know if that's exactly the reason why they're doing the buffs as they are, but 3 health growth and 0.3 attack damage growth will be some nominal amount of power to this champion. Here is Tryndamere's health before and after. Here is his attack damage before and after, accounting for his Q rank up. He definitely has a lot of base AD as a champion. This is one of the highest in the game for sure. But yeah, Tryndamere is pretty low win rate, so I think solid to see the buffs here onto this champion. Next is AP Twitch. People think this is a love tap. It is not a love tap. Keep in mind, you stack this thing 6 times. This has a 210% ability power ratio on the E. This is a 0.3 AP ratio decrease from 210% to 180%. Seriously, this is a very, very big deal. It's a lot of the power. A lot of Twitch's E damage actually comes from the scaling, from the bonus AD, from the bonus AP. Yeah, this is a bigger deal than you think, because guess what? You can apply it to the entire enemy team, and you can stack it 6 times. So this is a case of, I think I probably should have said, maximum ability power damage, 210 becomes 180. I realized it too late, but I should have probably put that into the patch notes, just a clarification sentence or bullet point. But either way, here is if you somehow auto once and press E, the damage is down 1 to 7% on AP Twitch. If you get 6 stacks, it's down 2 to 10% on this. Yeah, turns out your primary damage tool losing up to 10% of its damage is actually a pretty big nerf. So I think this is actually pretty impactful overall. Twitch support is relatively balanced. Twitch AD carry, Twitch bot lane as both AD and AP are both strong, but the AP one is a sentiment problem. And then mid lane AP Twitch is overpowered. I mean, AP Twitch bot lane is overpowered. AP Twitch mid lane is overpowered. AP Twitch support is annoying, but not necessarily overpowered. I think a nominal nerf is fine. This certainly, again, is in it for the champion. And I think, generally speaking, players are relatively okay understanding, like, if it's 48% win rate, you can kind of stop nerfing it, you can kind of stop banning it. I think this is directionally still the right nerf for the champion. Could have nerfed the passive, could have done some other stuff. There are potentially ways to nerf level 1 damage a little bit, but I think this is a good first step on Twitch. If we have to go farther, we certainly can. But I actually do think these are some solid nerfs, and power-wise is a good amount of power reduced from AP Twitch. Next is Xayah. We thought that buffing her AD, her base AD ratio or attack speed ratio and a level 1 attack speed was going to be about a 1% win rate increase. It was about a 2.5% win rate increase, which means we're just counting the days until it was time to finally nerf the champion. It took people a while, but they finally got there. People have finally caught up with how good this buff was. And instead of just walking back the previous buff, which I think could have been done, and actually version 1 of the changes was just walking back the buff to a midpoint to just get for that 1% win rate that we're looking for. Instead, saw that Xayah is elite skewed, and then also now that you can really, really reliably buy Navori Quick Blades, her cooldown profile is very different to before. Because before she was like, okay, I'm going Gale Force or Kraken Slayer, and then I'm buying like Phantom Dancer, and then I'm buying like Caulfield's Warhammer, then the game ends. It's like, well, no, you're getting Quick Blade second, you're getting the auto attack reset, you're getting the 20 haste instead of the 10 haste. Like, she just has lower cooldowns as a champion. And so here we are. It would be tough making this cooldown instead of not 2 seconds over the course of time because her E rank up is only 10 damage. It's a really, really good skill. The AD ratio scaling is really, really aggressive, but it has so few rank up scalers. I didn't want to do any less than 0.5 seconds on rank up. I could have done 10 to 9 instead of 11 to 9, but is what it is. Anyway, Xayah is, again, the cooldown problem, and also she is somewhat elite skewed. And elite play tends to be early game focused, so 5 flat damage off E will tend to be elite skewed, and then because she's going to have really, really good cooldown refunds later on in the game with Quick Blade, she's not going to feel this nerf nearly as much in the late game, but she just feels a little bit in the early game. So we'll see if this is going to be a little bit early game skewed as well on the E change. But here is Xayah's E damage before and after, accounting for some amount of bonus AD, and then the cooldown before and after as well. I hope these nerfs are not as big as the buffs from 13.1. Because the goal was to have her have a higher win rate than in 2022. So hope we hit this correctly. We'll see what happens. Yorick is getting a simple damage decrease. So Yorick's big build right now is AD lethality full squishy. His E being a just straight up nuke ends up being a pretty smart nerf incentive so that he's not just a nuker anymore. So I think a pretty smart choice on this one. It's going to be applied up to 8 times per ghoul. This is definitely a lot of damage. So Yorick, going from 1.4 to 1.3 on the damage during his E. Definitely pretty meaningful stuff there. He's going to be less of an E nuker. Great. Good job. A nerf to Yorick. Then we have Zed, who's losing 3 MR and getting the cooldown incentive back up on E of 2 seconds instead of just 1 second by the end of the rank. Turns out W max second Zed is higher win rate. They're not yet very popular on the champion, but probably correct for this champion to max E second overall. So here is his MR before and after with a 3 MR nerf. Here is the amount of magical durability he will have on average as a result of this one. And then also here is the cooldown before and after as well. The solid 25% cooldown decrease by max rank of the ability. Should feel pretty good. Should be a good change. Good job, Zedo. Next, we have pretty big changes to the jungle overall. So guess what? The damage amp now affects all camps. No longer only affects stuff on your side. Counter jungle speed is a lot faster. Having playtested this, you can really, really, really feel this. Power farm Lilia, take the enemy camps, get out. There is a lot here. So being a fast clear jungler, going and invading and taking camps because your opponent ganked a lane they shouldn't have, you will be rewarded much more rapidly by this. It's funny how many misunderstandings there are where people think like, oh yeah, you don't get the bonus gold or the bonus XP on camps in the enemy jungle. That's not true. It doesn't heal you if you kill it on camps in the enemy jungle. That's not true. The only difference was you didn't get your 20% bonus damage when killing them, making you rely a bit more on smite to knock down the camp. Well, that is gone. It is now going to be flat across all champions. Congratulations. You can now counter jungle and steal away large sources of gold and XP. And speaking of sources of gold and XP, each camp has about 10 more gold on it. So hey, guess what? Camps are a larger source of your gold income, more so than waves. And if someone leaves camps up, you can more quickly take them away to take them for yourself and earn more gold and deny this large increased opportunity cost amount of gold from your opponent. So big buff to counter jungling, big buff to power farming. Also, by the way, a big nerf towards being in the other lane and being a part of this. This is a pretty big deal. Lane XP is down. Lane XP is down for junglers throughout the early game. Now, I want to point out, though, this starts scaling from the first second of the game, and minions don't spawn and meet until almost 2 minutes into the game. So this is a little bit fraudulent because you never really get 40%, because it's scaling from 0 to 14, right? Like, let's be honest. So let's talk about what's really going on, though, with this one. Oh, yeah, here, this is, 1 minion wave for a jungler. So this is 3 melee minions, 3 caster minions for a jungler pre-patch, solo XP. This is what it is post-patch. You can see, wow, if you for some reason catch a wave at 2 minutes into the game, you are getting 40% less XP than before. This is like, I'm Jarvan, I killed red buff, and then I ganked bot lane, and we shoved the wave. He is getting 40% less XP for doing this. A more realistic scenario is like level 4 or something, where you maybe finish your first clear, or it's on your second clear, you take your next camp or whatever, and then you come, grab a wave or whatever. But like, level 3 is a pretty standard, like 3 camp clear, or maybe it's a 4 camp clear and then gank, and then share with your teammates. Well, you get 37% less experience for doing that. And this is, of course, like, if you're sharing it 2 ways or 3 ways, you're not quite losing 80 XP. You're losing more like 50 XP. I didn't bother doing one for sharing it with 2 people. I could have very easily. I just kind of didn't. But it's around there, right? Instead of, it's you're getting, I think, like, you're getting about 2/3 of this field, basically. I think something around there. Either way, we look at, level 8. Like, we're solidly into our 2nd, 3rd, 4th clears. And yeah, you are getting still 40 or so less XP per wave you are taking up or sharing or whatnot. This is definitely a pretty big move because, again, the camp that you're not clearing has 10 more gold in it. The wave you're shoving has 40 less XP in it. This is a very big difference. I want to point out one thing, by the way, which is the value of an individual camp is around, red buff, like around like a level 4 red buff is 115 XP counting your jungle item. And Gromp is like 60 XP or so around like a late game spawn. And so in any given case, like a minion wave was more XP than a camp, and minion waves are worth about 100 gold as well, without counting for a cannon. So they're also worth more gold than a camp. It was better for you to get a minion wave than a camp in all contexts. Now, 2 camps is better than a wave, almost certainly, because 2 camps is around 100 XP each, which before was actually pretty comparable, right? If you go kill the enemy top laner, and now Kha'Zix goes and catches top wave, like Kha'Zix goes like, oh shit, my Jax died, and kills Gromp and soaks a full top wave, he just got 2 waves on you, right? You kill the enemy top laner, the jungler catches top wave, that guy got 2 waves of XP. 2 camps of XP. Like, now you go recall, go back in the camp, and you hope you have camps up. Now it's more like, a camp and a half. But also keep in mind that the gold difference is different as well. So, like, this is one of the things I've been seeing a lot on Twitter is people are like, look how much XP this guy has, XD. And it's like, okay, but experience is not the only resource in the game. Like, gold also matters. I actually wish our scoreboard not only showed like the raw level of champions, but also just the amount of total gold earned in some non-map hacking degree. Because then when you're like, why is this 1 in 4 Jarvan the same level as me? And it's like, well, you have 4,000 gold on him. He just happened to share some waves. Like, and to be fair, that is like to a certain degree a fault of the game, because the game is presenting a difference in power, like in irregular ways, right? I think generally speaking, the game should try to align gold and XP pretty tightly together. There's champions like supports where it's not going to be the case, and that's okay. But generally speaking, people feel really bad when XP like doesn't line up with game state, despite the fact that I think XP is less reactive to game state, where like the amount of gold you get from a kill is 3 waves of gold, and it is much less XP than 3 waves of XP, right? Because like even with a jungle penalty, right? It's like 300 experience for a minion wave, basically, right? And so getting 3 waves is 900 XP to a laner. That is not remotely close to what a kill gives you. Now, maybe this should somehow line up in some way, right? But also keep in mind that, getting a wave but missing all the last hits is still full XP. There's a bunch of weird stuff there where resources are not doled out in equal measure. And that's going to create weird perception issues where people believe that things are unfair when it's just like, well, not everything is tracked the same way. And again, there's probably some UI fixes we could do that made this more apparent, that made it more apparent how ahead you were, even though the level's the same. It's like, oh, they're level 8.01 and you're 8.99, and also you're up 3,000 gold, but if you look at the scoreboard, you see you're both level 8, and that's going to look bad, right? So again, I think there is work that can be done to make that more apparent, what the advantages are, but again, certainly a lot less XP on many waves for junglers. Sweeping Lens, longer cooldown in the early game. You cannot as easily sweep wards away. It is harder to gank in a couple patches prior. The yellow trinket was buffed with a lower early cooldown, so you could more reliably ward the enemy jungler, or ward the jungle entrances, or ward the river entrances, or ward the path to your lane. And now the sweeper is up less often to remove those wards, and you can now see those junglers coming in more and more and more. I do want to point out one thing with this counter jungling thing is that I think there is a pretty reasonable point that anti-counter jungling helps. Like, so if you're like a new top laner, right? You're against an enemy top laner, and it's like if they kill you, you get it, right? If they kill you, they had to walk at you down the lane. They like walked past your minions and they fought you, and you got fought, and they did the damages, and you lost a 1v1, right? And like you might get outplayed, you might get snowballed on, but like that's all pretty apparent and like fair essentially. Or if they hit in the brush and like ganked you, like by faking a recall, it's like, oh, that was a good play, you did something kind of clever. I think getting counter jungled, especially getting killed counter jungling, feels substantially worse than just getting killed 1v1. Because hey, if you die in lane, they still got their lane of XP. They got XP and gold from killing you, and you lost a source of gold and XP because you didn't get the minions anymore. But like, they didn't get more than your dead body. Whereas if someone counter jungles you, they get your dead body, you lose the wave, and they gain a wave, a camp, and they gain a camp they wouldn't otherwise have killed. And so the snowballiness of getting counter jungled, especially killed, or even if they don't kill you, right? They push you back, right? Like if Renekton pushes me to recall and I lose a wave, he is up because I'm behind, but he doesn't get any extra gold. If Rengar or Graves counter jungles me and pushes me off, he actually earns more gold and I lost gold, and he earns XP and I lost XP. So like that interaction is very, very snowbally, and like there's a reason that a lot of times jungle is a really unpopular role, especially at lower ranks, because like that experience is incredibly punishing. Now ultimately the call is like the debate here, and this is a lot of game design, by the way, and just design in general, and just for games, is like holding a bunch of things in the air and saying which one's more important, which way is it to go. Because like making counter jungling worse does a lot for cradling the low elo jungle experience, where it can be hard to ward your entrances, where laners don't react to invades and collapse when they're supposed to, and like this Kayn should have been punished for aggressively counter jungling you, but your laners aren't showing up, and you just get counter jungled by the counter jungler, and it sucks. Now of course also everything's swung so hardly that like it's just gank meta and there is no counter jungling. And it's like, well, okay, it's just gank meta, there's no counter jungling, is maybe a worse thing for League of Legends than, well, it really sucks to be a low elo jungler where your lanes don't collapse and support you when dumb counter jungling happens. But like, there is really some positive benefit to this mechanic existing. Anyway, moving on from there, sweeping again got nerfed. Last thing is item change to Cosmic Drive. I think this is a really smart change. I do think there is still a world where there can be some good like AP bruiser items with stat profiles like old Cosmic Drive. But anyway, it is now a very big AP stat stick. It is losing all its health. It is giving an amount of ability power pretty much equal gold value wise to the amount of health lost, but it makes it a much stronger item because now Cosmic Drive is a 90 aka 130 ability power item, with some move speed attached, with a bunch of ability haste, with more move speed attached. Like, this can be a pretty sweet item. Again, gold defense, you can see, is pretty much identical here before and after. It is up 1 gold, whatever. But the stat profile is going to feel a lot better for mages. So congratulations, mages. You have an item back in the pool. You have a really, really good ability haste stat stick with a lot of AP attached. Now, I'm of the belief that spell dance should not give ability power, that it should feel good to gain move speed. So in terms of doing a larger scope reshape to the item, a riskier change that require more development time, I think there's a version where spell dance doesn't give ability power, and you just have like it's 110 AP on the stat stick or 100 AP on the stat stick or whatever it is, and spell dance just kind of feels good on its own, and it's this burst of move speed and feels good. I think that is generally a positive, because you're still waiting behind landing 3 spells for your next spell to actually get the ability power bonus. I think there's something a little bit janky still about the item, but hey, yes, if you are a CDR mage, Cassiopeia, Rise, things like this, it's pretty trivial to get a few casts off and then ride the AP for the team fight. So it's not like a bad design. It is meant, right? Like this would not make sense if this item didn't have ability haste. Because that's ability haste, is like, no, this is meant for people who want the haste, who want to repeat cast spells, and so they're okay getting through their AP later. I just, again, in general, would like it to have just upfront ability power, but it's a really, really minor thing. And again, I'm glad this has 90 upfront ability power. Cool stuff here. I think it's a pretty solid change. Steel Caps now affects all things that are applied or tagged as auto attacks instead of things that were tagged only as auto attacks. So this would be like, oh yeah, so like Gangplank Q, I believe, applies spells, and it might count as an auto attack and count as a spell, and now Steel Caps affects Parlay. if it was tagged that way. I actually don't know for sure. But now, basically, if the attack is tagged auto attack at all, instead of only auto attack, it'll apply. This will be actually a lot of things that will get applied by steel caps now. This is a very special buff to this item. This item is actually quite bad. Like, people, basically, like, I've known for a very, very long time, steel caps is actually not a good item. People incredibly overpurchase steel caps. You were paying 500 gold for functionally just the percent damage reduction thing. They thought it didn't apply in a lot of stuff. And so people thought the item was good. It didn't have any way of, like, measuring their experiences, although they, I don't know, feel like they should be able to notice this. And it's like, turns out this item is actually horrible. So this is actually a huge buff for steel caps. Don't sleep in this. It's actually a very, very big deal. Steel caps is a real item now and is actually viable. Congratulations, everyone. Seraph's Embrace getting a nerf of 50 health and 10 AP. Archangel Staff already had only 200 HP on it. This was a freebie on the combine. Just a 10 AP nerf on Archangel Staff. So here is Seraph's. I am counting a Mana Mythic and Seraph's itself in the ability power via Awe. So Awe here is any future gains of mana, Mana Flow Band, Biscuits, things like that. So this item was incredibly gold efficient. This is actually not even counting the mana. It's just these stats. And now it's reasonably gold efficient, counting just these stats. The mana is free in this case. So certainly a very good ability power stat stick. Some ability haste, decent amount of health. This is obviously pretty comparable to Shadow Flame in the amount of numbers it gives, right? Shadow Flame, of course, gives Magic Pen. Seraph's gives ability haste and a fat shield and the possibility for a little bit more ability power and the mana, which is, of course, quite nice as well. So Seraph's nerfed into the realm of a real item. Mana is usually functionally a free stat as it is. And this is pretty much reasonable, I would say, overall. Finally, Grasp of the Undying and Triumph have healing-focused nerfs. So overall healing is down for melee and range, but the amount of max health it gives is going up. Here is the Grasp of the Undying data table. Here is your max health. Here's how much it used to heal. Here's how much it heals now. And you can see that really early game, level 1 Grasp, not really any different, but your late game healing is definitely going to go down through Grasp. You're getting up to, 10 or so less healing per Grasp proc if you are melee. 6 or so less healing per Grasp proc if you are ranged. But keep in mind, hey, your health gain goes from 5 to 7. So you're getting more max health every time, and 3 to 4 if you are ranged. So a 40% increase and a 33% increase for ranged champions in max HP gained by the rune. Neat stuff, overall less healing. Then we have Triumph. Instead of 10% missing health, it is 2.5% max plus 5% missing health. I believe this breaks even at 75% current HP. So for most targets, it is a nerf, especially fighters who are pretty heavily drain tanking back up as time goes on. Oh, sorry, with a break-even point about 35%. Got it. I trust those are the numbers. I didn't really look at it. I didn't bother doing the numbers because I know someone else did. But yeah, this is... wait. Hold on. Yeah, slightly less healing when it matters more. Low HP with an even breakpoint around 30. Wait, hold on. So if I'm at half HP, I'm getting 25% plus 5% missing is 25%, right? Yeah, this was like 5% total heal. Oh, yeah. If I'm at half HP, it's the same number, I think, right? Unless I'm trolling. I don't have the ability to pause right now, actually. So it's like, if I'm missing 1,000 health of my 2,000 health, no, let's say I'm missing 500, 1,000 health, right? 10% of 500 missing is 50. This is 25. And then 5% of 500 missing is also 25. So half HP is the break even. Am I right? Like, it's at half, right? Right? Unless I'm trolling? Maybe the numbers are different from what's written down here. Maybe I'm really dumb. Either way, whatever. The really low health Triumph heal back up a ton is going down a little bit, which I think is actually reasonable. I actually had suggested a sort of nerf to Triumph like sometime last year. I thought it was kind of a frustrating rune to play around because of how much like the brink of death comeback just feels really bad. It's tough because it means fighters need to be burstier if they can't survive a longer team fight. Like it's a really tough call. Like, how do you make champions that are meant to play long team fights and are melee without making them just be tanks? And it's like, maybe they just need to just be tanks. They have no self-healing, and you just make Sterix Gauge an even stronger item, is maybe the play. And Black Cleave needs even more stats on it. And like, maybe that's just what is a more fair version of these champions. Either way, haven't given a ton of thought on what shape fighter should be overall, but again, if you're below half health, it's definitely less healing on Triumph, as far as I can tell. Some ARM changes, not going to talk about those because that's not what the run-ins are about. Alrighty, so it is, of course, an 83-minute rundown so far. We still can't have short rundowns, even though I did my own context video earlier on. It saved me like 20 minutes on Azir, though, for sure. So here we go. TLDR, Yuumi Midscope update is in. I think the design work here is really, 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 really good. Yuumi is a lot squishier when unattached. She no longer has a strong auto attack incentive on the passive. It's just, hey, land the Q or land an R to turn on this heal over time on the passive. Great. Q basically disjoints from your teammate much sooner. It after about a second or so, it detaches and fires in a straight line. This feels really good, trust me. If you land, you give your teammate on hit damage. W no longer gives a bunch of bonus stats. It now gives heal on hit to the teammate, as well as giving her some heal and shield power for her E shield, for her passive heal, and for her R heal. E is now a shield instead of a heal. Cooldown, mana cost, shield strength, move speed, attack speed, all fairly similar, but it also gives her target some mana on actives. They have extra mana to cast spells with. Last chapter no longer roots. It is now a ramping slow on hit, kind of like Rammus ulti. It's also going to still do a fair bit of damage. You can now aim these waves, by the way. Pretty big deal. You can steer them with your mouse. And you now heal your teammates, and your best friend gets a bunch of bonus armor and MR. Pretty positive stuff overall. Aatrox gets his last rank a bit better cooldown and a bit more slow. He gets rank 2 and 3 of his R, do a bit more damage. Looks pretty solid there. Ashe is getting a 10 damage volley nerf and 20 to 0 seconds nerf on Enchanted Crystal Arrow. These are both aimed at support Ashe nerfs with a compensation for AD carry Ashe, where once you get your 4 stacks, you have 50% longer duration on range of focus, which should be a very, very big deal. Quite the compensation buff. We'll see what happens, but I hope for this to be roughly neutral for AD carry Ashe. Aurelion Sol doing far too well, especially in high elo, losing some health growth and armor growth, as well as a little bit of AP ratio on the Q for some late game power. I think these are well-targeted nerfs. Azir is getting a really, really, really big update. TLDR, early durability is down, early mana is down, and early attack speed, aka W DPS, is down. However, his late game is going to be about the same. Let's talk about the passive. It has half the duration, half the cooldown. Durability TLDR is the same, but the DPS is up like 40 to 50%. So the passive does a lot more damage and is up twice as often. Pretty big deal there. Conquering Stance, a bit less damage and a stronger mana cost as well, but breaks even at 2 items. W no longer gives you free attack speed, which opens up Nashor's Tooth as a viable item again. TLDR, your first 5 levels, DPS is down, and then from there, your DPS is equal to higher, especially in the late game, but the 3 soldier attack speed is gone. Shifting Sands, a very small AP ratio nerf, not a very big deal here, don't worry about it too much. We'll see which way Azir's winner ends up going. The passive is a very, very large buff. The W changes, the Q changes, the base health changes are neutral to negative. We'll see how it goes. Can always compensation buff if needed if he ends up being in a bad spot. Caitlyn loses 2 AD and 1 armor. Pretty simple early game focus nerfs. Fizz gets better mana restore on his W, gets a lower mana cost on E, and a bit more damage on E. Pretty substantial buffs to Fizz. He should look really, really good post-patch. Gangplank loses about 10% of his damage off of his passive, and he loses a pretty substantial amount of cooldown on Powder Keg, and you see the number of Powder Keg charges on the health bar. That's a pretty big deal as well for counterplay, but he should really, really feel this. This should be a pretty substantial nerf to Gangplank. Jinx gains about 6% attack speed by the end of the game, which is a much bigger deal for Rocket form than for Minigun form, where it already prints some free attack speed, but lower mana cost, better slow on Zap, and the R now rivals Smite in monster damage. Kennen, 1 second off the early cooldown, but substantial damage, 20 plus a 0.1 AP ratio increase on Q is a pretty big deal here for Thundering Shuriken. This should be felt quite a bit, pretty big buff. Electrical Surge now shows for him. If he's tagged the champion, he knows the W range. I think it's a really cool change. Really, really nice stuff here. Excuse me, sorry. And Lightning Rush is now a slightly better damage against minions, a 30% damage increase there. LeBlanc is a better last-hitting tool against minions. It has a flat damage end to minions and also will now restore the mana cost and part of the cooldown if you last hit with it, either by casting Q or popping the sigil. Pretty nice stuff here for our girl LeBlanc. Meant to be a lower elo solo Q skewed buff to help her last hitting, because you can keep up with mages who have actually good wave clear on the kits. Shouldn't do nearly as much for pro play. We'll see what happens though. Pantheon gets changes skewed towards top lane and a bit of jungle here as well. 2% more attack speed. Substantial cooldown increase early game to his Q, buff to the mana cost and the cast time as well. Should make Q spam Pantheon, which is I think how you're supposed to play top lane, feel a whole lot better. But lower health regen and his typical second max gets nerfed here through Aegis Assault is going to be a bit of a change there as well. So we'll see what happens, but it's definitely going to be, I think, a top lane skewed buff. Qiyana gets 5 damage per rank up on the Q, as well as a 1 second cooldown off of the E. Pretty simple stuff here. Not much to talk about with this one. Rammus was a 0.75 attack damage per level. This is not as big of a deal as you might think, since he gets a bunch of free attack damage through his passive and his W, though it's still going to matter some. He's also losing 0 to 20 damage off of Powerball, which matters a little bit as well, but ultimately I think Rammus will still be a strong counter pick in the hands of most players against AD compositions. Rumble gets a pretty spicy set of buffs here, where he's going to have a lot more damage, especially if he can land both harpoons against high MR targets in late game. This shred does amp if you are in the danger zone. This can do a lot because your theoretical maximum shred goes from 30% to 60% of your enemy's magic resist if you can land 2 harpoons on the same target during the danger zone. This can be a lot of bonus damage. You can have up to like 50% more damage dealt as a result of this. It can be a lot, but we'll see. Again, it is gated behind landing both harpoons in the danger zone and then doing follow-up damage afterwards, which does require several things, since, they can be tanked and whatnot, but this will give, I think, Rumble quite a lot more late game, and directionally, I think these are very good changes. We'll see if it's too much, but I don't think it will be. We'll see, though. Samira is getting just a bit more move speed early game through her passive via the fact that she got over-nerfed in the previous patch, so this is where her move speed was pre-patch anyway, and now it's just 2 to 3.5% instead of the 1 to 4. So this could have been the first version, but didn't seem like it was enough, and it turns out it was too much, so off we go. Tryndamere getting 3 health growth and getting 0.3 attack damage growth. Pretty simple late game skewed buffs for Tryndamere. AP Twitch losing a large amount of his AP ratio actually on his E. This is actually a quite big deal. This makes a 6-stack AP ratio go from 2.1 to 1.8. This is a pretty big deal considering that E is about a third or so of his total damage output. I think this matters quite a lot. So AP Twitch going to lose quite some win rate. Xayah losing 5 damage off of Blade Collar and getting a 1 second longer cooldown on this one as well. Early game lane focus nerf, as well as just overall fewer feathers to spam out. Should feel this one a fair bit. Yorick is going to be less of a nuker, losing, going from 140% damage basically to 130% damage per attack on ghouls. So a, 7% damage nerf overall on what this ability kind of provides. Not a huge deal, but will be a win rate nerf, and I think pretty well targeted in terms of what's going after. Zed getting his cooldown incentive back on Shadow Slash. That Emax second goes back to being correct is the hope, but getting a compensation nerf of 3 magic resist to make him a little bit less overbearing. He's a relatively balanced champion. The goal is win rate neutral, but of course, when you simply buff an ability, you got to nerf something else if you want to keep the win rate neutral, so 3 MR seems safe enough. The jungle adjustments. Counter jungling is now going to get the same damage amp as not counter jungling. Camps are worth 10 more gold, and substantial decrease amount of XP you get as a jungler in the lane when you poach lane XP. All this reinforces clearing your own damn camps, and giving a benefit to counter jungling. If someone does go and just turbo gank and poach XP in the lane, that's going down. So the value of clearing is definitely up. If you got a power clear junglers you want to play, well, it's going to be a pretty big deal here. We probably will get a shift out of the turbo gank meta we have been in for a while. This feels like a very, very nice, very big swing, but I think this is really, really cool stuff overall. Sweeping Lens, a longer cooldown in the early game as well, means junglers will sweep out fewer wards. Will also make ganking less powerful. You can more reliably keep wards in their jungle and track them to be less killed. Cosmic Drive loses 200 health and gets an equal gold value of ability power. This ends up, I think, making it much better on the obvious users. This tends to be, I think, more of a ranged item in the first place. 200 HP is really not enough. If you're looking at, if you're snowballing, I have bought this item on both Lilia and Mordekaiser, 2 champs that I love playing a very large amount. And this is actually a really good snowball item on them, even though it was only 200 health for 3,000 gold. And even though you lose 200 health, I actually did play a Lilia playtest with Cosmic Drive. It actually still felt pretty good. Just because, having 130 ability power stat stick actually feels pretty nice. Either way, though, whatever. I think this is still directionally positive for Cosmic Drive overall. I would like to see a suite of items for AP Bruises at one point, but, that's not today. Plated Steel Caps is a damsel buff. It now affects everything that is partially in auto attack instead of things that are only in auto attack. This is a very, very big deal to what it applies to. Really, really, really big stuff. So now, I think this just makes it a not garbage item. Congratulations, Plated Steel Cup is actually a good item now. Seraph's Embrace losing 10 AP and 50 health is obviously a pretty big deal. A much needed nerf. This item was well too efficient. Much, much, much too good. So a well-deserved nerf. Good stuff here, and correct to do so. Grasp the Undying has less healing. This ends up being the same healing level 1, but down around 25% less healing in larger full health builds. As you get towards the 2500 or so HP, it's about 25% or so less healing, and that trend continues as time goes on. But there is more max health per stack, so overall should still be a reasonably strong item, just a strong rune, but overall less healing provided. Just more about the flat stacks itself and the damage it provides. Triumph also going to be less healing. Mostly around, if I do my math correctly, this is at half HP. It's going to do less healing. Maybe I did my math wrong, but that's what I believe this to be the case. Either way, is what it is. That's going to be it for me. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. I had a good time running this patch down. I had a good time being a part of the patch. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave me some comments. See you next time. Bye-bye.